Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to The Takeout. The sordid Jeffrey Epstein saga is not about politics, a client list, scrutinized footage of Epstein's suicide in federal custody, or runaway conspiracy theories touching on one or all of those subjects. At its core, the Epstein case is about victims of sexual abuse, victims of human trafficking, a great number of them young girls from America and other countries. Though it didn't get much attention last week, the Trump Justice Department said there were more than 1,000 victims of Epstein's predatory crimes. Some of those victims have received monetary compensation. Criminal justice, however, has proved stubbornly elusive and, of course, will never be achieved. Some in the MAGA movement demand more answers. Certain Epstein had powerful friends or pulled strings to evade justice for so very long. They wonder now if the Trump administration has told all it knows or all that is knowable. The Attorney General, therefore, is on the spot. Today, our Scott MacFarlane asked if she felt her job was safe.
I'm going to be here for as long as the president wants me here, and I believe he's made that crystal clear. It's 4 years, well, 3.5 now, right? We've got 6 months in, and it feels like 6 years.
Bondi also dodged questions about Epstein. We will have more on Epstein's victims in a moment from the reporter who has done more than any other reporter to tell their story. But we start with Scott MacFarlane here with me now. Scott, it's great to have you here. You were there. I want to play for you also sound when the Attorney General was asked a direct question about Jeffrey Epstein, the files, the Justice Department conclusion about that, much disputed. Let's listen.
I appreciate your question, but this today is about fentanyl overdoses throughout our country and people who have lost loved ones to fentanyl. That's the message that we're here to send today. Nothing about Epstein. I'm not going to talk about Epstein.
Not going to talk about it. Fentanyl is a legitimate, serious, deadly issue in this country. The Justice Department has every right and priority to look into it, talk about it, put policy forward on that. But Epstein is an issue, and it's roiling Justice Department.
Yeah, but she went out to a press event at the DEA headquarters in Virginia to talk about initiatives involving fentanyl and involving drug abuse and drug interdictions. But the questions were about Jeffrey Epstein because so much focus has been placed on Pam Bondi on this. I mean, there's so many different players in this sordid drama, but right now Pam Bondi is at the center of what to do with the files. If there are files to be released, it's her decision whether to do so. And so many allies of the president are urging her to do so. It's not the Democrats. It's not third parties. It's powerful people in the MAGA universe. And she right now is in the political epicenter of a storm.
And asked about this today, the president said he still supports Pam Bondi as Attorney General. And then he made some sort of reference, I couldn't quite distill it, about maybe other information that is in their possession or that might come to the surface?
I don't know what the path out of this is, and that's a problem as we start the week here in Washington.
It was as misleading to you as it was to me.
It was cryptic, it was broad.
Right.
But here's the thing. These are the people who have said Pam Bondi might want to consider more transparency. House Speaker Mike Johnson, Lara Trump, President Trump. These are not the people who are there to criticize Pam Bondi, but it's also unclear what there is to release. I mean, they tried this last week. A 2-page memo said the death was by suicide. There is no list of cohorts of powerful people who helped Epstein exploit
children. And there's no reason to believe there could be successful prosecutions of third parties, meaning accomplices who worked either with Jeffrey Epstein or Ghislaine Maxwell.
What's more, if there is a file of people who may have been investigated but were exonerated or for whom there was no evidence of misconduct, you can't just release that. You can't unring a bell of an innocent person ascribed to a crime. And that's, I think, what Pam Bondi has alluded to in the past. These files do not include information that is relevant. This information also includes child exploitive images, too. We can't be releasing this stuff. But that hasn't quieted calls that are inside the House.
Right. And inside the House, there was an effort by the president today to kind of muddy the waters, saying these files were phony Obama-Biden files, somehow casting some sort of doubt about either their relevance or their believability.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much traction
within the MAGA base that's going to work.
That's not effective because, again, it hasn't quieted the calls from the Trump-aligned surrogates, from the people who have big audiences, big megaphones through which to scream. But the one megaphone that's gone silent is Dan Bongino. Deputy FBI director, who didn't show up for work Friday, had some heated exchange with the attorney general over the Epstein matter. He's back on the job, we're told, but he has been silent on social media. And if you know Dan Bongino, his millions of followers, his huge talk radio audience, he doesn't go silent very often.
Scott MacFarlane, always a pleasure, sir. Thank you so much. Investigative reporter for the Miami Herald, Julie K. Brown, joins me now. She has been reporting on the Epstein story for years. Julie, it's a pleasure to have you on our program. Talk to me about what all this stuff going on in Washington does or doesn't mean to the victims of the Epstein saga.
Well, it's just another disappointment upon disappointment for these victims, some of whom have been brave enough to go public with this case and have urged the Justice Department for years to more thoroughly investigate the case and to hopefully get to the root of who helped Epstein, because the reality is Epstein did not do this by himself. He could not have operated this by himself. He had a staff of people that literally did everything for him. So there's other people who helped him that they should be looking into. And these victims have named some of those people that they suspect were involved. So I think that this is probably just another trauma for them. You know, they relive this every time this story explodes, and they're reliving all that trauma all over again, I believe.
Picking up on that point, Julie, when you read the two-page Justice Department memo released last week, and it said the Justice Department sees no purpose in pursuing potential prosecutions against those third-party potential accomplices, what did you think about that? How did you react to that?
Well, I just knew right away in my gut that that was another, another disappointment. As I said, another slap in the face to these victims who believe that those accomplices were just as much to blame, if in some cases more so to blame, because they were the ones that called these women up. They were the ones that brought these women, these girls at the time to Epstein. They were the ones that arranged the schedule, arranged the taxis to come to his house. So in some respects, these people were just as guilty, at least in the eyes of these victims.
Does it read to you like something approximating a cover-up?
Well, let me put it this way. We know from all the reporting that I've done and other reporters have done that there was a cover-up probably at the highest levels of the Justice Department back in 2008 when he got this miraculous sweetheart deal that essentially he pleaded guilty to a minor offense, served a small very cozy jail term, and then walked free and continued on with his life, continuing on, by the way, with abusing young women and girls. So the fact that this is now happening like this, and there's so many questions, I think that it's fair to ask whether this is another example of a cover-up concerning this horrible crime.
And remind my audience of the scope and scale of the victims involved, Julie.
We think there's at least 200 because when after Epstein's death, when they set up a victims' compensation fund for them, we know from the organizers of this fund that there were at least 200 people who were approved for these settlements. However, there were probably lots of other victims who either weren't approved because they didn't have any evidence at all, which isn't surprising. If you're 16 years old, you're not gathering evidence against people, or they were just not willing to come forward. I mean, there's many people women and victims who have never told anybody that this happened. So it's possible that there could be hundreds more victims.
When the Justice Department memo said more than 1,000, did that number strike you as surprising?
Yeah, it did. It sounded a little high based on what I know, but that doesn't mean it. In fact, what it does mean is there's a lot more information in those files than I even suspected. If it indicates there's that many victims, then this was a much larger sex trafficking operation than we had believed in the past.
Julie K. Brown, Miami Herald investigative reporter. Thank you so very much for your time. I appreciate it.